Last year, the independent film that you're about to see took France by storm and became one of the most popular films of the year. Now, I don't think that was supposed to happen, because this film tells a story that was supposed to have been buried centuries ago. It's a story of genocide in the Vendee in western France during the French Revolution. That revolution, which was based on the principles of Freemasonry and deism and so forth, secularism, it claimed to be all about liberty, equality, and fraternity. And yet one of the first things the revolution did after they'd beheaded their own king and queen was to go down into western France and commit genocide against their own people, against 500,000 of their own. The Catholic peasants of the Vendee. Now, I first heard this story of the Vendee from an old French friend 30 years ago, who told me about it as we walked along the pilgrimage route from Paris to Chartres. He encouraged me to go to the Vendee, to learn about the Vendeans, and then to go back home to tell their story to the Americans, to people who had never heard it. There were people in France at the time who had never heard the story of the Vendee. So embarrassed was the revolution of the genocide that they most certainly had committed against their own, against soldiers, against women, against babies, against animals, against crops. They had a scorched earth policy to erase the Vendee. And why did they want to erase the Vendee? It was because the Vendee was thoroughly Catholic and stood strong for the kingship of Christ against their demonic revolution. So in 1997, I did as my friend suggested, and I took 50 Americans back down into western France near Brittany to the heart of the Vendee, and we told their story. At that time, some of the places that were most important had been most important to the war in the Vendee. They were so overgrown with weeds and trees and overtaken by the forest that it was very difficult to access them. I remember, for example, something called the Chapel of the Martyrs, where the Vendeans had taken their wounded into the forests off the battlefields during the war, completely overgrown to such an extent we couldn't find it on a map. That's how complete the cover-up had been to make sure the story of the Vendee never got told. Now today, if you're an English-speaking person and you've heard of the Vendee, the chances are good that that is because of one book called For Altar and Throne by Michael Davies. It's because 30 years ago, after my French friend had suggested that we go to the Vendee and tell their story, I had asked one of the great premier pioneer traditional Catholics at the time, a Welshman by the name of Michael Davies, to go with me and to help retell the story of the Vendee. So the little book For Altar and Throne was presented for the first time audibly at a place called La Chaboterie, where Monsieur Charette had been taken after his arrest. So Michael Davies' talks in the Vendee were so successful that I published them on a little book almost 30 years ago. And since then, the world has found out more and more outside of France about this incredible event. And why is it so important to tell this story? Why is it so important that we tell our children this story? It's because this is the story of the Vendee is the story of the original traditional Catholics. Men and women who only wanted to be left alone, to be free to raise their families, to practice their Catholic religion as it had been handed to them, down to them, from their fathers and their mothers, but they weren't allowed to do so because the revolution was waging war against the church, against the social kingship of Jesus Christ. So this is a story of heroes and martyrs, not necessarily of saints, at least not at first. But most of these men died martyrs' death for that cause. Monsieur Charette, Monsieur Henri, Louis d'Elbée, Jacques Cavillino, the peddler, the saint of the Anjou, who denounced the revolution first when he armed himself with his rosary, his pistol, his saber, and the badge of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which was handed down to him from Saint Louis de Montfort. And then he said to his 500 men that day before they went to war, he said, "Never forget, we are fighting for our holy religion. They attack us because they attack Christ, and we are followers of Christ. When we make war against them, we defend him." So the film that you're about to see tells their story. It tells specifically the story of the most well-known, the king of the Vendee, François Athanase Charette de la Contrie, or simply Monsieur Charette, born in 1763 and executed 33 years later. So why did he die? Why did the Vendeans die like this? What was their fight about? See, the Vendeans were not fighting for the mass that they preferred. They were not fighting for their personal religious freedom. They were fighting, and they died, for the social reign of Jesus Christ, for his altar, for his throne, for his kingdom. They died for him. And they didn't lose. The true story of the Catholic uprising in the Vendee teaches us that persecution is not the end. Persecution only proves that the revolution has run out of ideas, that the revolution failed, and that a remnant will always survive, that God in his providence will always see to it that the cross will rise again from the ashes of any new world order. So the Vendeans are the forefathers of the modern traditional Catholic movement because their uprising 230 years ago was the first campaign against the anti-Catholic Enlightenment which sought to destroy the Mass, the Latin Mass, to destroy the old faith, to eradicate the social kingship of Jesus Christ, and to banish God from the face of the earth. Wow, that war started in the Vendee 230 years ago, but we're still here today. That war is not over because that war is our war. And it's not just a battle for the Latin Mass. Armed with rosaries and the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the old Latin Mass, the peasant army of the Vendee stood against the same devils against which we stand today. They lost their lives, but they kept the faith, so they won in the end. And they handed that faith down to their sons and daughters, who in turn handed it all the way down to us. So let's go back in time now. Let's go back to the bogs and the marshes and the lowlands of Western France as ugly revolution against the church and against the kingship of Christ is raging in the capital city of Paris, not far from where we are now. The eldest daughter of the church is being led to the guillotine. Priests and king, nuns and queen, beheaded. The entire Christian social order systematically eradicated from the heart of Christendom. But now, today, they're still coming. They're coming for us. Listen, can you hear the horses' hooves? They're coming again. So what will you do? Will you run? Will you compromise? Will you give up the faith? Or will you stand with men like Charette, nobly, honorably, to the end? Will history tell your story as it's telling his tonight? Are we ready to fight and die for the honor to say these words along with Monsieur Charette? Voilà ma gloire, mon espérance et mon soutien, mon chant d'amour et de victoire. Je suis chrétien, je suis chrétien. I am Christian. I am Christian. Will you stand with Charette? Will we stand with the original traditional Catholics?